So I don't know if y'all heard or not, but the election this November is going to be a game changer, because whoever we elect as president is not just going to affect our way of life for the next 4 to 8 years, but they may completely change the game on our freedoms and protections for decades to come. Meaning this election could have lifelong consequences. Every single branch of government is on the ballot this November, okay? And the reason why I say that is because there are 33 seats up for grabs in the Senate. Every single seat in the House of Representatives is up for re-election. And then depending on who gets elected between Trump and Harris, one of them will likely get at least one, if not at most 3 new Supreme Court justice picks. So with that being said, and in light of Justice Gorsuch's most recent opinion on the role of central government and constitutional protections, I think it's important to look at this election from the perspective of the powers of America's most highest court. So currently, there is a supermajority of conservative justices on the bench, and 3 of them justices were appointed by Trump. And so now these 3 justices have sealed the deal in overturning decades of precedent, right? We have the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, which gave a woman the right to an abortion. We have the Fair Admissions versus Harvard case, which basically got rid of affirmative actions in schools. We had Chevron overturned and other SEC cases. So now, according to Justice Gorsuch, what once was not gonna be no more, and the American people need to go ahead and get used to it. So what it sounds like is that this Supreme Court plans on reeling back on a lot of those federal laws and regulations that we've been so used to for so long, and putting that power back into the hands of the American people. Or at least that's what they're saying they're doing. So now the question is, how did we even get here? Well, it was mostly by choices that were much less by way of the American people and much more by other entities. So now in the year 2000, the Supreme Court actually decided that election when they held in the case Bush v. Gore that, you know what, Florida, we ain't got time for you to recount them votes. So who the winner at this point? So what happened in that case is basically the margin of error between who had won between Bush and Gore was so thin that Florida law said, well, when it's something that thin, you might want to go ahead and recount them votes and make sure everything is straight. And so they had a recount. Gore was like, go ahead and recount them votes. And when they recounted the votes, what they found was, it's even thinner. Hold on, right? So initially, they had Gore losing Florida by like 1,500 votes. But by the time they did the second recount, they was like, okay, well, he only losing by like 300 and some votes. Florida law then said, okay, well, when you got a margin of error that thin, you need to go ahead and hand count them votes and make sure everything is straight. The issue was, them people wasn't going to be able to finish counting them votes in time for their secretary to go ahead and certify the election. So when the case went to trial, the Supreme Court said, well, they can keep counting if they want to, but at this point, if you're not going to meet the deadline, you go ahead and run it and let us know who won. At that point, Bush ended up winning and getting the 25 electoral votes that Florida had at the time, which put him over the hump to get the 270 electoral votes that he needed in total to become the president. So then when Bush became president, he actually got to elect 2 Supreme Court justices, Justice Alito and Justice Roberts. So now in 2016, Justice Scalia passed. And at the time, the sitting president was Obama, and he was actually on his way out the door. And as history would have it, you would think that Obama, being the current sitting president who was elected by the people, would get to choose his next Supreme Court pick, right? And he already had somebody in the arsenal. He was ready to elect Merrick Garland. But no. That's not how it went down. The Senate Republicans at the time actually refused to allow Obama to have his Supreme Court justice pick. In fact, they switched the game and basically said, Obama, you're on your way out the door. So we think that the American people, whoever they decide to be the next president, that next president should be able to choose the next Supreme Court justice. In fact, in a speech that Mitch McConnell did that August out in Kentucky, he admitted that one of his proudest moments was when he looked Obama square in his eye and said, Mr. President, you will not fulfill the Supreme Court vacancy. Now, also during the Obama administration, it was a big kerfuffle because people was telling RBJ, girl, pack it up. At this time, RBJ had been on the bench for quite some time. And when I say quite some time, I mean like 27 years. By this point, she had made plenty of history and had really put women on the map, especially when it came to interpreting the Constitution. But instead of retiring, word on the street is that RBJ was so convinced that Hillary Clinton was going to win the 2016 election that she was trying to hold out until that election was over with so that Hillary would be able to appoint the person who was going to sit in her seat next. Well, that didn't happen. Okay, Trump won that election, and as a result, he got 3 Supreme Court justice picks. Justice Gorsuch took Scalia's seat. he appointed Justice Amy Barrett to take RBG's seat. And then Justice Kennedy said, well, let me just dip up out of here at this point then. And then that's how Justice Kavanaugh ended up in his Supreme Court justice seat. Okay, so now what does any of this have to do with the current election? Well, in 1790, when the Supreme Court was established, the life expectancy was much lower, okay? So them justices was only serving about 15 years on the bench and they was getting on. Today, them justices is serving about an average of 30 years on the bench. So now if Trump is reelected this November, it is more likely that Justice Alito and Justice Thomas will go ahead and retire on their own accord. Therefore, giving Trump 2 more Supreme Court justice picks, and them people finna be young, and they probably gonna serve for a long time, which means that super conservative majority finna be super secure for a super long time. On the other hand, if Kamala Harris wins the election, you will likely have a justice like Justice Sotomayor who will learn from RBJ and even Justice Brennan and be like, you know what, I'm 70 years old, I've spent 15 years on the court at this point, let me go ahead and dip out right now while it's safe. Now keep in mind, although this is very unlikely, Justice Thomas is 76 years old. Justice Alito is 74 years old. So at any time between the next 4 and 8 years, one or both of them could decide, you know what? The timing is right for us to go on and retire. With the way our current Supreme Court is structured, there will continue to be this unbalanced battle between too much government, not having enough government, and what our Constitution actually protects. And what that looks like and how that will affect the American people's future is really comes down to ideology. Because according to Justice Gorsuch, for example, the American people can be mad all they want to about the decisions that are coming down from the Supreme Court, but in their mind, they're not really taking rights from y'all. They're trying to give them back to you, right? Why would you want us 9 people to decide what you do to your body? And I ain't gonna hold you, too much power amongst the people has kind of been a problem from the beginning of time, which is why James Madison pushed so hard for a constitution, because according to him, if you read Federalist Papers 51, his thing was, if all men were angels, we wouldn't need no government. But that's not how we roll. People are selfish. Now, on the other hand, you have justices such as Justice Sotomayor, who was like, I don't care what y'all say about y'all giving the power back to these people. These rulings are a power grab. Justice Sotomayor also says in her recent dissents that this particular Supreme Court fails to understand how its decisions really threaten the separation of powers. And then most notably, in her dissent on the Trump immunity case, she flat out says, it is with fear for our democracy I dissent, which is a likely sign that the decisions that are going to come down from this particular Supreme Court will reverberate in our lives for decades, if not our entire lifetime.